14. Shosa Yubari Takuda sat with the other members of the Dest headquarters. He would have to send a patrol to make contact with the humans, a mission that would require sending the best. The night section had made first contact with the aliens, and so by all rights, he should send Arsenault and his team on this patrol. It was a matter of sharing the responsibility and the danger, but he didn't have as much confidence in Arsenault's people. Roland Dupe, the number 2 man in the section, had a tendency to gripe. That wouldn't have been so bad in itself, for griping about duty was a time-honored tradition among soldiers. But Dupe had a nasty habit of complaining about almost everything, which he'd been doing since even before they'd landed on the planet. Takuda felt for Arsenault, who had to put up with it on a constant basis. The other member of the team was Dana Lost. One of Lost's distinguishing characteristics was the desire to do anything for anyone, to the point of volunteering to do so. There was not a fighting position in the Dest perimeter that Lost had not helped build. He had worked on his own, then gone roaming the site looking for other jobs that needed doing. The problem was that Dana Lost was also opinionated and loud, and most of his opinions were wrong. He and Dupe were inseparable friends, but between one's griping and the other's opinions, they were constantly fighting. Rising above it all was Arsenault, serene and calm. Takuda decided to give them the assignment just to keep them out of trouble. Since time immemorial, military organizations had tried to prevent the dangerous problems of idleness among soldiers. They usually solved it with uniforms loaded with brass as well as healthy doses of close-order drill to keep the troops well occupied during the innumerable, interminable periods of boredom between combat. Takuda discussed the plan with Socho Saitan Yura. He would have preferred to have another officer in the headquarters section, someone of equal social standing, but the non-commissioned Yura was all he had. Having served the Draconis Combine for nearly 40 years, the Sergeant Major had seen commanders, policies, victory, and defeat come and go. Nodding in agreement, Yura listened impassively to his commander explain the mission and the people he would send. Yubari Takuda hoped that the nod meant agreement with this particular decision, not agreement with any decision. Takuda rose, about to direct the sergeant to issue the orders, when Garber Vost suddenly made an appearance.
"I've been thinking, Shosa," the mercenary said, "about the idea of contacting the humans to the west. I think we must do it as soon as possible."
Takuda could hardly suppress a smile that tugged on his lips. This was the first time the mercenary commander had addressed him by his combined rank of Shosa, rather than that of Major. It was also the first time since they'd boarded the dropship that Vost had spoken to Takuda with anything approaching deference. Something smelled, but Takuda was willing to let it play out.
"You have an idea, Pilot Vost?"
"Well, we don't know how far it is to the humans. We could send out a foot patrol, but it could take days to get to them, and more days to get back. If the patrol ran into any trouble, which wouldn't surprise me from what that furry fellow had to say, we'd never be able to support them. We'd all have to go. There's also the problem of how much time the patrol would need. We don't have a clue how far away from each other those enclaves are. It could take days to recon all of them."
"Yes," acknowledged Takuda. "Time is a problem."
He had, in fact, come to much the same conclusion. The mechs could cover the ground much faster, and the LAM, which was stored in the dropship's overhead bay, would be faster still. But he didn't want the mechs deployed, at least not yet.
"The LAM could make the trip out and back in less than a day."
Vost could see that Takuda would never think of using the mechs on his own. He would have to be prodded. That was the trouble with the Combine soldier's mindset, thought Vost. Once he'd been trained to react in a certain way, he could never change that set. No wonder the Draconis Combine was so desperate to hire mercenaries. It was only mercs who had the ability to think on the move.
Yes, mused Takuda, that is so. But I wonder about using a machine of such immense firepower around these people who have never seen one, and certainly have never seen something that flies. It could be quite a shock.
Damn right it will, thought Vost. That's just what I want.
We could tell Seagroves to stay at high altitude. They might not even be aware of his presence. And even if they did see him, they wouldn't know what they were seeing. It could be worth a try.
Can we get the Lamb out of the dropship?
It's taken some damage, and I understand from Pocket of Vood that the hull has been wrenched. We'd have to cut the hull open, which would mean we'd never be able to fly it out.
We're never going to fly it out anyway, thought Vost. With the program, old man. We're here on this planet for eternity, just like the others. And we'd better make the best of it. Even if the dropship could fly, there was no place to go.
The sacrifice of the dropship would probably be worth it,
Takuda was saying.
But I worry about the weapons. Having them is a temptation to use them. I wouldn't want that. I think our pilot Seagroves might be tempted. Perhaps you could use someone else. Perhaps Pilot Goodall.
Takuda knew that Vost was qualified on the Lamb, but next to Seagroves, Vost was the last man he wanted over the Enclaves. Oh, no, you don't, thought Vost. You're not going to mess up this plan like that.
Well, Goodall isn't Lamb qualified, he said. As for the weapons, we could always activate the external default for the lasers. To use them, the pilot would have to land to re-engage the system, which it would take 2 men to do. The Lamb is stored in flight mode in the dropship, so once he took it out, he'd be on his way. We'd just default the weapons while it's still hanging.
Takuda did not quite trust Vost's suggestions, but this did seem like the best plan. The Lamb could do in a few hours what it would take a foot patrol to do in a week or more. The information wouldn't be of the same detail and accuracy, but it would provide enough to make other decisions.
We'll do it, he said. Great. I'll get my people working on it at once.
Parker DeVood was equally convinced that deploying the Lamb was the best plan, but he didn't want to see his dropship gutted like a piece of meat after slaughter. As long as the dropship maintained its structural integrity, they'd always have at least the possibility, however far-fetched, of being able to fly out again. Besides, the dropship was his. He owned it personally. He'd bought and paid for it from his earnings, money he'd taken significant risks to get in the first place. His profits from owning the dropship had let him live in a way that others only dreamed of. Destruction of the ship would mean he could never hope to resume his former life. Yet DeVood knew there was no alternative. Examination of the ship proved beyond a reasonable doubt that it would never fly again, even if they didn't cut it apart. DeVood dreaded hearing the news, but he couldn't avoid it for long. Once Mark Jacobs, the jump ship engineer, got a really good look at the wreckage, he consigned the dropship to the breakers.
Your main spar looks like a corkscrew, he announced. Not only that, but ribs 17, 18, and 19 have been stressed beyond their rebound point. They're so brittle, I'm surprised you got this thing to the ground. The lifeboat's problems are even worse. I guess I really did a job of it while augering in. There's not an aerodynamic surface left to it. It'll smoke and fume and burn, but it'll never fly. Same with yours.
He thumped the side of the dropship.
Oh well, easy come, easy go.
But cutting into the dropship proved a more stubborn task than first imagined. Even using cutting torches from the maintenance compartment, it took quite a while to slice along the top of the hull. The torch had been designed for minor repair jobs, not for peeling away a section of hull. Jacobs finally suggested that laying cable along the surface and then superheating it with power from the fusion core might do the job more easily. It did, amid a shower of sparks that sprayed over everything. At last, the nose of the Lamb came clear of the hull. Seagroves had, meanwhile, been in the cockpit checking the systems and circuits. The crash had so damaged the power couplings that 3 of them needed replacement. That was easy enough for the 2 minor ones, because replacement couplings were among the prescribed load list bins the technicians carried. The 3rd coupling was a major, no-failure joint that could not be replaced out of stores. The no-failure joints were designed to last the life of the ship and were sealed into the systems. Seagroves became pessimistic when he got a red light for that system, but Jacobs, always a tinkerer, came up with a solution. By cross-feeding the neurofield control system with the intercoolers, he was able to bypass the damaged piece. He patted his repair with justified pride.
There. That should serve you for the life of the Lamb, or yours, whichever comes first.
Takuda and Vost climbed onto the back of the Lamb so that the desk commander could see the laser default system. They broke into the access panel and threw the switches that controlled the power feed to the weapons system. When Vost explained that the machine guns would still work, Takuda decided that leaving those active was probably a good idea. The short-range defense weapons might make a difference if the Lamb ever got into trouble. With the side of the dropship split down to the ground, the entire cargo area was exposed. The rest of the mech stood mute against the bulkheads, forgotten toys awaiting some call from the future. The other pilots could not resist climbing into their cockpits to check circuits and servos. There were no orders to deploy as yet, but it looked like they still might get their chance. The pilots felt a surge of hope. Even Jacobs, whose training on a mech had occurred so long ago, could feel the urge to break the machines free. It had been a decade since he'd last sat in his father's mech, but the instinct was still there. When the Lamb was completely clear, Seagroves reported to Takuda and Vost. The desk commander took the pilot aside.
You will be in a very delicate position, Mr. Seagroves. It is important that you make as little contact as possible with the humans. We don't know the situation, and we don't want to stumble into something that could overwhelm us. Be very careful. Stay as high as you can, and still get some idea about what the enclaves are like. Just be careful.
Seagroves nodded. With the briefing over, he and Vost began the climb to the Lamb cockpit.
Get low, said Vost. Low enough that they can see you, and you can see how they react. As far as contact goes, Takuda's right. We don't want to get committed until we have more information.
Seagroves nodded agreement to these instructions as well. The mercenaries and the desk team stood clear as Seagroves fired up the Lamb. The clouds of exhaust poured out of the ruptured hull, enveloping most of the ship in a ball of glowing smoke. Then, in a shattering burst, the Lamb came free from the restraining shackles and raced across the landing zone. The last those on the site saw of it, the craft was in a vertical power climb. Seagroves was in his element at last.